Think about the last argument you were absolutely certain you were right about. Not pretty sure, not fairly confident, certain. The kind of certain where the other person's arguments didn't just feel wrong, they felt like they weren't even trying. Like they were willfully ignoring something obvious. Like the evidence was right there and somehow they still couldn't see it. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. How do you know you were right? Not what you believe. What do you actually know based on evidence you genuinely examined? Not evidence you collected to confirm what you already thought. Because here's what your brain has been doing this entire time. In every argument, every relationship, every belief you've built your identity around. It hasn't been looking for truth. It's been looking for proof that it's already right. Every piece of information that confirms what you already believe, your brain waves it through immediately. No scrutiny, no friction, just yes, file that. Every piece of information that contradicts what you already believe, your brain doesn't discard it. That would be too obvious. Instead, it questions it, finds the flaw in it, remembers why that source isn't reliable, decides this particular case is an exception, and then it files that too as more evidence that you were right. This isn't something that happens to other people. This is happening inside your head right now. And by the end of this video, you'll understand not just why, but why the smarter you are, the worse it gets. And why being shown proof that you're wrong doesn't make you update your beliefs. It makes you hold them tighter. Before we go further, one thing worth saying clearly. This isn't about intelligence. That's the first thing most people assume when they hear about cognitive biases, that they affect people who aren't paying attention. People who aren't educated enough, or careful enough, or self-aware enough. The research says the opposite. Smarter people aren't less affected by confirmation bias. In fact, they're more affected. Because intelligence doesn't protect you from filtering evidence through existing beliefs. It just makes you faster and more convincing at doing it. A more intelligent brain constructs better arguments for why the contradicting evidence doesn't count, finds more sophisticated reasons to dismiss it, builds a more airtight case for what it already believed before it encountered a single piece of information. The problem isn't your reasoning ability. The problem is what your reasoning ability is in service of. And here's something worth carrying into the rest of this video, especially if you watched our episode on attachment styles. The same mechanism that makes you choose familiar partners, your nervous system filtering for what it already knows, what it already expects, is operating in your beliefs too. You're not just drawn to familiar people, you're drawn to familiar ideas. The ones that feel true because they've always felt true. The ones you don't examine because examining them would mean entertaining the possibility that something you've built part of yourself around might need to come apart. That's what we're looking at today. Not the beliefs themselves, the machinery underneath them. In 1960, a psychologist named Peter Wason ran a simple experiment. He gave participants a sequence of 3 numbers, 2, 4, 6, and told them the sequence followed a rule. Their job was to figure out the rule by proposing their own sequences, and Wason would tell them whether each one followed the rule or not. Most participants proposed sequences like 4, 6, 8, or 10, 12, 14, even numbers increasing by 2. Wason confirmed each one. So they concluded the rule was even numbers increasing by 2. They were wrong. The actual rule was simply any 3 numbers in ascending order. But here's what matters and why Wason's experiment became one of the most cited in psychology. Not a single participant proposed a sequence designed to break their theory. Nobody tried 1, 2, 3. Nobody tried 5, 10, 200. They only proposed sequences that would confirm what they already believed. And Wason kept confirming them. Because those sequences did follow the rule, just not for the reason they thought. This is confirmation bias. Not a failure of intelligence, not a failure of effort, a failure of direction. Your brain, left to its own instincts, doesn't ask, what would prove me wrong? It asks, what would prove me right? And then it goes looking for exactly that, and finds it, and calls the search complete. Here's why this happened, why evolution built you this way. A brain that constantly re-examines every belief from scratch is a brain that can't function. You'd spend so much processing power questioning whether fire is dangerous, whether the path home is safe, whether the people around you can be trusted, that you'd never actually act on anything. So your brain developed a shortcut. Once a belief is established, assume it's correct unless something overwhelming forces a revision. Filter for confirmation. Flag contradictions as suspicious. Keep the existing model stable. In a simple, slow-moving environment, the one your brain was designed for, this works beautifully. In the actual world you live in, one where your beliefs about people, relationships, your own abilities, and the information you consume daily are constantly being shaped by sources that have every incentive to tell you what you already want to hear, this shortcut becomes one of the most expensive cognitive habits you have. Because you're not just filtering random information, you're filtering the evidence that could change your life. The relationship red flag that gets rationalized away. The feedback at work that gets dismissed as the other person's problem. The belief about what you're capable of or not capable of that has been quietly confirmed so many times it no longer even feels like a belief. It just feels like the truth. Let's make this concrete. Because confirmation bias doesn't live in abstract philosophy. It lives in the specific moments of your actual life. The ones you probably don't recognize as biased at all because from the inside, they just feel like seeing clearly. In your relationships, this is where it hits hardest and where it costs the most. Think about the early stage of falling for someone. Before you know them well, before there's real evidence either way, you've decided somewhere in the first few interactions that this person is remarkable, that this connection is different, that something real is happening here. And from that moment, your brain stops evaluating them neutrally. Every warm text becomes proof of the connection. Every moment of vulnerability becomes evidence of depth. Every time they show up, even when showing up is the bare minimum, it gets filed as confirmation. And the things that don't fit, they get explained, rationalized, assigned to stress, or a bad day, or context you don't fully understand yet. You watched our last two videos. You know what this looks like in practice. Love bombing works partly because confirmation bias helps it along once the belief, "This is the most intense connection I've ever felt," forms. The brain starts filtering everything through it. And attachment styles determine which direction the filter runs, whether you're filtering for signs the connection will disappear, or filtering for reasons to keep your distance, or filtering for proof that this person is as perfect as they seemed at the start. But it runs in the opposite direction too. Once you've decided someone is untrustworthy, a partner who has hurt you, a friend who has disappointed you, every neutral action they take gets reread. A slow reply becomes evidence. A misunderstanding becomes a pattern. Genuine effort becomes manipulation in disguise. You're not wrong to be cautious. But you're also not seeing them anymore. You're seeing the story your brain already decided on. In your social media feed and the news you consume. This one is less personal but worth understanding because it explains something that otherwise makes no sense. Why people on completely opposite sides of the same debate both feel equally, completely certain that the evidence supports them. The algorithm already knows what you believe. It knows what you click on, what you pause on, what makes you react. And it feeds you more of it, not because anyone is conspiring against you, but because content that confirms your existing beliefs keeps you engaged. And engagement is what the platform optimizes for. So you're not seeing the information landscape, you're seeing a highly curated version of it shaped specifically around what your brain was already going to accept. And the other side is seeing the exact same thing, a highly curated version of the same landscape shaped around what their brain was already going to accept. Both sides feel like they're paying attention. Both sides feel like the evidence is obvious. Neither side is seeing the full picture. In how you see yourself, this one is the quietest and often the most damaging. If you believe somewhere underneath everything else that you're not capable of something, not smart enough, not talented enough, not the kind of person who succeeds at that particular thing, your brain will find evidence for it constantly. The rejection that confirms the belief, the struggle that proves it, the person who does it better, whose success gets filed not as inspiration, but as further proof of the gap between where you are and where you'd need to be. And if you believe the opposite, that you're doing fine, that you're on track, that the feedback people are giving you is wrong or exaggerated, your brain will find evidence for that too. The small win that gets amplified, the criticism that gets dismissed, the progress that feels more significant than it actually is. Your brain isn't lying to you. It's doing exactly what it was built to do. It's just that what it was built to do isn't always what's true. Here's where this gets genuinely uncomfortable. We've established that confirmation bias makes you filter for evidence that supports what you already believe. But there's a question underneath that we haven't addressed yet. What if you don't know what you don't know? What if the belief you're confirming isn't a belief you're consciously aware of holding, because the very thing that would let you recognize it as a belief is the thing you're missing? In 1999, two psychologists at Cornell University, David Dunning and Kruger, ran a series of experiments that produced one of the most cited findings in modern psychology. They tested participants on logical reasoning, grammar, and humor. Then, they asked each participant to estimate how well they'd performed relative to everyone else. The pattern was striking and consistent. The participants who performed worst dramatically overestimated their performance. People in the bottom quarter of scores believed they'd performed better than roughly 2/3 of other participants. The people who performed best slightly underestimated their performance. Why? Because the skills required to recognize your own incompetence in any domain are the exact same skills as competence in that domain. If you don't know enough about logic to reason well, you also don't know enough about logic to recognize that your reasoning is flawed. The gap in skill and the gap in self-awareness are the same gap, filled by the same missing knowledge. This is not about stupidity. Dunning himself has said that this effect applies to all of us in every domain where our knowledge is limited, which is most domains, for most people, most of the time. You are an expert in a handful of things. And everything else, you have a version of this problem. Now here's where confirmation bias and Dunning-Kruger collide, and why, together, they're more dangerous than either one alone. Confirmation bias makes you filter for evidence that confirms existing beliefs. Dunning-Kruger means that in the domains where you're most limited, you're also least equipped to notice that the beliefs you're confirming are wrong in the first place. So you're not just filtering for confirmation, you're filtering for confirmation of beliefs you can't even see clearly enough to question. You don't know the belief is there. You don't know it needs examining. And every piece of confirming evidence that comes through makes it more solid, more invisible, more treated as simple reality rather than a perspective that could be wrong. The people most affected by this combination aren't the ones who feel uncertain and confused. They're the ones who feel most certain. Certainty in the absence of genuine expertise is often the clearest signal that something needs looking at more carefully. Not because confidence is always wrong, but because the feeling of certainty and the fact of being correct are two entirely separate things, and your brain, left to itself, will treat them as the same thing every single time. So far, everything we've covered has a logical solution sitting underneath it. If confirmation bias makes you filter for confirming evidence, seek disconfirming evidence instead. If Dunning-Kruger means you can't see your own blind spots, find people who can see them for you. Listen to feedback. Stay open to correction. Reasonable? Makes sense. Except for one problem. When someone presents you with evidence that directly contradicts a strongly held belief, a fact that proves you wrong, a statistic that undermines your position, a correction delivered clearly and in good faith, your brain doesn't update the belief. It defends it, not just maintains it, defends it more strongly than before the correction arrived. Psychologists call this the backfire effect. And it explains something that otherwise makes no rational sense: why showing someone proof that they're wrong can make them believe the wrong thing more intensely than they did before you showed them anything. Here's the mechanism. A strongly held belief isn't just a piece of information your brain is storing. It's connected to your identity, to your sense of being a competent, intelligent, trustworthy person who understands the world correctly. When contradicting evidence arrives, your brain doesn't process it as information. It processes it as a threat, and threats trigger a defensive response, the same basic neurological machinery that activates when you're physically endangered. Your brain floods with the impulse to protect, to push back, to find the flaw in the attack. So you don't examine the evidence. You look for what's wrong with it. You question the source. You find a methodological flaw. You remember the counterexample. You decide this particular case is the exception, and having successfully defended the belief against attack, your brain files the experience as further confirmation. You were challenged. You held. The belief survived. It must be solid. This is why fact-checking misinformation, done bluntly, often makes it spread further. This is why confronting someone directly about a manipulation tactic, presenting them with clear evidence of what they did, can make the dynamic worse rather than better. This is why telling someone their relationship is unhealthy, even with evidence, even with love, often pushes them closer to the relationship rather than away from it. The correction isn't failing because it's wrong. It's failing because of how the brain responds to being corrected. Now, here's the part that should stay with you. This applies to you too, not just the people you've tried to correct, not just the beliefs you've watched other people defend irrationally. Every belief you hold that you feel strongly about, every position you've defended, every time you've been presented with contradicting evidence and found somehow that it didn't quite land. The backfire effect doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like defensiveness from the inside. It feels like critical thinking. It feels like you examined the evidence and found it lacking. It feels, in other words, exactly like being right. So where does this leave you? You can't opt out of confirmation bias. It's not a setting you can turn off. It's not a habit you can simply decide to stop having. But you can learn to work with it not by becoming suspicious of everything you believe, which is its own kind of paralysis, but by building a few specific habits that interrupt the filter before it runs unchecked. 3 of them, concrete ones. The first, ask, what would change my mind? Before you form a strong opinion on something, a person, a situation, a belief about yourself, ask yourself this question explicitly, not rhetorically. Actually answer it. What evidence, if it existed, would make me update this? If you can't answer that question, if nothing comes to mind, if the honest answer is nothing really, that's not a sign the belief is solid. That's a sign it's unfalsifiable. And unfalsifiable beliefs aren't beliefs at all. They're closed systems that no new information can reach. The moment you can name what would change your mind, you've created a specific thing to watch for. You've given your brain a different instruction. Not find confirming evidence, but watch for this specific thing that would update the belief. That's a meaningful shift in direction, even if it's a small one. The second, steel man before you dismiss. Most people have heard of a straw man misrepresenting an opposing argument in its weakest form, so it's easy to knock down. Steel manning is the opposite. Before you dismiss a contradicting piece of evidence, or an opposing view, or feedback that stings, construct the strongest possible version of it first. Not the version that's easiest to argue against. The version that would be hardest to argue against. Then argue against that. If you still disagree after genuinely engaging with the strongest version of the opposing case, your position is on much more solid ground. If you find you can't actually counter the strongest version, if the only version you can defeat is the weakest one, that's information worth having. This doesn't mean you have to change your mind every time. It means you know what you're actually working with. The third, treat certainty as a signal, not a destination. This is the hardest one, because it runs directly against every instinct you have. The stronger the feeling of certainty, the more worth examining the belief underneath it. Not because certainty is always wrong, but because certainty and correctness are two different things, and your brain, as we've covered, will produce the feeling of certainty whether or not the underlying belief has earned it. So when you notice that feeling, that solid, settled, completely sure sensation that the other person is wrong, or that you understand exactly what's happening, or that you already know how this ends, pause. Not to abandon the belief, to look at it. Ask where it came from. Ask what it's built on. Ask whether the evidence you've gathered for it was evidence you sought, or evidence you found because you were already looking for it. You don't have to answer those questions perfectly every time. You just have to ask them, because the filter runs automatically. The questioning doesn't. That's the only place the work actually happens, in the gap between the certainty arriving and you deciding what to do with it. So, here's what we've actually covered today. Your brain isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do, filtering for confirmation, protecting existing beliefs, defending its model of reality against anything that threatens to destabilize it. The problem isn't the mechanism. The problem is that the mechanism runs whether or not the belief it's protecting deserves to be protected. Whether the belief is, this relationship is worth staying in, or this person can't be trusted, or I'm not the kind of person who succeeds at that, or I already understand this situation, the filter runs the same way. The certainty feels the same. The evidence accumulates the same. And now you know something most people never get told. That the feeling of certainty isn't proof of correctness. That the smarter you are, the better you are at defending what you already believe. That showing someone proof they're wrong can make them believe the wrong thing harder. And that the only real interruption available to you, the only place where any of this can actually change, is in the gap between the certainty arriving and you deciding what to do with it. Ask what would change your mind. Steelman what you're about to dismiss. Treat certainty as a signal worth examining, not a destination worth defending. That's it. That's the whole practice. If this video made you genuinely uncomfortable at any point, that's the one. Drop the belief in the comments that it touched. The one you held for years and eventually had to revise. Or the one you're still holding and part of you knows deserves a second look. One belief. Just write it down. I read every single one. Subscribe if you want to keep going, because next week, we're taking everything we've covered about how your brain filters reality and applying it to something even more unsettling. What happens when someone deliberately exploits that filter? What happens when the confirmation bias you can't turn off gets used against you specifically, intentionally, and in a relationship you trusted? There's a tactic for that. It has a name most people have heard, but almost nobody recognizes it while it's happening. Next week, gaslighting. Not the word, the actual mechanism, and why by the time most people name it, the damage is already done. I'll see you in the next one.